On March 19, 2001, the Russian space station Mir disappeared from low Earth orbit. There was no collision or explosion. 1 minute it was there and the next it wasn't. For 24 panicked hours, a select group of scientists, intelligence agents, and government officials worked tirelessly to simultaneously figure out what had happened and prevent the general public from discovering that anything had occurred at all. Exactly 1 day later, Mir reappeared in the precise location it had last been observed. It appeared relatively unchanged, but for one major exception: the space station, which had been unoccupied for months in preparation of deorbiting, was now inhabited. The fact that you've never heard of this proves the cover-up was successful. Figuring out what caused this anomaly and what happened during the 24 hours Mir was missing is an entirely different matter. I know this because I was there in Roscosmos Mission Control on that day in March so long ago. I've never told a single soul this story, but I'm an old man now and I don't have long left to live. Humanity needs to hear the truth before there's no one left alive to tell it. In the days leading up to the anomaly, there had been a distinct sense of gloom hanging over the mission control room. Every one of us there had dedicated our lives to the space station, and now it was all about to end. Mir was launched into orbit by the Soviet Union in 1986 for what was supposed to be a 5-year mission. Now, 15 years later, the plucky space station that had survived the end of the Cold War and collapse of the USSR was showing its age. It was cluttered, dirty, worn, and rapidly deteriorating when the Russian government decided to finally divert all funds and manpower to the newly built International Space Station. Yet it still held a special place in the heart of every Russian who had ever looked up to the stars and dreamed of what was out there. Multiple attempts were made by various private organizations and individuals to fund the continued existence of the station, or even buy it outright. One company even tried to purchase Mir and turn it into a permanent orbital movie and television studio. In the end, it proved too expensive to be feasible, leaving us, a skeleton crew of scientists, astronauts, and engineers to despondently monitor the last few days of the station's existence. It was like watching a beloved family member wither away in hospice care. As a member of the communications division of Mir Mission Control, once a 25-member department, now dwindled down to just 6 essential personnel, I was home in bed when I received an urgent 4 a.m. call stating that an emergency had occurred and requiring me to report to Mission Control immediately. I arrived to find the normally tranquil control room in a frenzy of activity that verged on panic. My head was spinning as I was briefed on the situation. How could this be true? Something as big as a space station doesn't disappear without a trace. It seemed impossible. We all did our best, but there wasn't a whole lot anyone could actually do. All of our tracking systems seemed to indicate that the station had simply ceased to exist. Visual inspection of the station's normal trajectory confirmed this. Washington had also been discreetly contacted and vehemently denied involvement. Beyond that, what could be done? We activated every radio telescope we could get access to, hoping for a miracle. We even convinced the Americans to clandestinely use the Hubble telescope to aid in a visual search, but it was like looking for one particular grain of sand on all the world's beaches, and we all knew it. The next 24 hours passed in haze of coffee, cigarettes, and sleep deprivation. Then, 24 hours to the second after it went missing, Mir suddenly and inexplicably reappeared as if we had collectively wished it back into existence. The monitors showed the station there intact and seemingly whole, where a moment before there had been nothing but empty space and distant stars. A stunned silence engulfed the room, stretching out for what felt like hours. Then the radio crackled to life and I jumped in my seat, breaking the trance. We were receiving a radio transmission from an unmanned space station that had just reappeared as if by magic. It made no logical sense. The voice that came over the mission control speakers was breathless and panicked. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is cosmonaut Alexei Ladovsky attempting to contact Soviet space program in Moscow. Please, does anyone read me? Over. For a moment no one reacted. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind was reeling, trying desperately to maintain a grip on reality in this world of sudden insanity. Ladovsky. Alexei Ladovsky. The name registered with me. I'd heard it somewhere before, but I couldn't remember where. We looked at one another in confusion, no one wanting to take responsibility for the situation, no one knowing how to proceed. Finally, the director made his way to the communications station to take command of the situation. Roger, cosmonaut. We read you loud and clear. This is Yuri Koptev, General Director of the Russian Space Agency. The soft hiss of static filled the room as we waited for a reply. Russian Space Agency? I do not recall. I'm sorry, I do not recognize your name, Mr. Koptev. Is Chief Designer Sergei Korolev with you? I would very much like to speak with him. I exchanged a confused look with the operator in the terminal next mine, a small bespectacled man named Yakovlev. Chief designer Sergei Korolev was a legend, the founding father of the entire Soviet space program and arguably the founder of modern astronomy as a whole. He had also been dead for over 30 years. Director Koptev somehow kept his cool, not missing a beat. "I'm sorry, Cosmonaut Ledovsky, the chief designer is not here at the moment. Might I be of assistance to you?" he replied, with a barely detectable quiver in his voice. The only other sign betraying his trepidation was his hand gripping the transmitter so tightly that the knuckles turned a ghostly white. "Yes, comrade, you can tell me how to get off this damn thing and back to Earth. I can see it through the portholes. Please, you have to help me, I want to go home." "Affirmative, Cosmonaut. We're starting work on that as we speak. In the meantime, it's very important that you stay calm and try to answer our questions as best you can. I'm going to turn the radio over to my colleague Yakovlev, who will ask a few basic questions and take your biometric information in preparation," said Koptev. Then, whispering to Yakovlev, "Get him to take his heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and anything else you can think of. Just keep him talking, keep him distracted, and listen for anything unnatural going on up there." "This whole thing is unnatural, sir," replied Yakovlev. Director Koptev glared at him and motioned for him to put on his headphones. He then turned to the rest of the room and raised his voice. "The rest of you I need prepared for a briefing up front in exactly 30 minutes. In the meantime, no phone calls or communications with anyone outside of this room. No wives, parents, children, or anybody else. We're going completely silent. Failure to observe this protocol will result in immediate termination and incarceration." He walked briskly into his office and motioned for the other senior department heads to follow. A half-hour later we had gathered in the front of the mission control room under the large central screen. Director Koptev stood facing us, his countenance an emotionless mask. The sound of Yakovlev quietly speaking into the radio drifted up from the back of the otherwise silent room. Koptev cleared his throat and began. "As you all know, Russia's predecessor state, the USSR, was responsible for a great number of milestones in space exploration. One of the most important of these accomplishments was putting the first human into outer space, Yuri Gagarin, who completed an orbit around the Earth on April 12, 1961. A black and white picture of Gagarin, dressed heroically and covered in medals, appeared on the screen. What most of you do not know is that Yuri Gagarin was actually only the first human to survive spaceflight. 4 attempts were made previous to Gagarin, each ending in tragedy. As the Soviet Union was at the time in the midst of a space race with the United States, any possible failures were deemed poor for morale. As such, each attempt went unannounced and was shrouded in secrecy. Gagarin succeeded and was paraded as a hero for the world to see. The failures were covered up and details remain classified to this day. The first of these secret attempts was made in late 1957, a few months after the success of Sputnik, by a cosmonaut traveling in what amounted to a modified intercontinental ballistic missile. Instruments tracked his progress to a height of 186 miles, at which point the transmission was suddenly interrupted, the rocket seemingly disappeared, and the cosmonaut was never heard from again. That man's name was Alexei Ledovsky. A series of gasps rose from the small crowd. I could feel my heartbeat thumping away in my temple. None of this made any sense. Now I hope to God that the voice coming through those speakers really is Ledovsky, and that we can bring him back to Earth with a hero's welcome, but all of my instincts, as well as all the intel we've managed to gather, are telling me otherwise. While there are some obvious similarities between the disappearance of Ledovsky in 1957 and yesterday's disappearance of Mir, we all know that correlation does not imply causation. We must all try to keep level-headed, remain rational, and rely on our scientific training in trying to unravel this mystery. I cannot call in any more assistance, as that would only open the door to more leaks of information, so the people you see around you here in this room are going to have to be the ones to figure this out." He paused for a moment as we each looked around the room. It was only half as full as it had once been at the height of the program. My mouth felt very dry as Koptev continued. "To solve this puzzle, I'm going to need 100% effort and dedication from every single one of you, and it will not be easy. As far as I'm concerned, the events of the last 24 hours represent a total paradigm shift of all our previous understanding of physics and astronomy. So I want you to toss Occam's razor out the window, because the premises on which we based reality have changed. As such, all possible explanations are on the table, even the seemingly improbable. No hypothesis should be discarded without thorough examination. This is science discovery at its purest. This is what the Russian was born for. It goes without saying that a lot more than the fate of one cosmonaut is at stake. Awed silence filled the room as the gravity of the situation settled on each of us. My chest felt heavy and my throat tight. Director Koptev took a seat and Markov, the head of tracking and communications, took his place center stage. The central screen changed to the familiar image of the Mir space station. This is the highest resolution image of Mir we have from before the anomaly, captured about 15 minutes prior to its disappearance, he said in a hoarse smoker's voice. And here is an image of Mir currently. The picture changed over to one that looked superficially similar, though something was clearly off. A few moments later the screen switched again, now showing both images side by side. After only a few seconds of study the differences quickly became apparent. In the newer image the coloration of the space station was far darker, almost as if coated in a layer of soot. Scratches and dents covered its surface, where there had been few previously. Many of the solar arrays were broken and twisted and some of the modules showed cracks and other signs of wear. A few were even missing. This was clearly a very changed space station from the one that had disappeared the day before. The other thing that stuck out to me were the windows, clear and reflective in the first image, completely darkened in the second, as if someone had taped black construction paper to the inside of each of them. Markov continued on to introduce another of the many mysteries confronting us. After reappearing, the station's internal clock seemed to be malfunctioning. The time was still correct but the date now read March 20, 2045, 44 years into the future, and the exact same length of time from Ladovsky's disappearance in 1957 to today. Could that possibly be a coincidence? Perhaps, but the sinking feeling in my gut told me that it was not. Either the computer was malfunctioning or Mir had really been somewhere else for 44 years, while only 24 hours had passed here. The thought still makes me shudder to this day. Markov went on to highlight a few more strange occurrences. First, the life support system, which had been shut down for months since there was no left on board, was found to be engaged and operating when Mir reappeared. Something up there was breathing, be it Ladovsky or something else. Furthermore, if the man on Mir really was Ladovsky, how could he possibly know how to activate the life support system? Technology in 1957 was extremely primitive compared to what is up there on the space station now. There's no way he should have been able to access the computer system and navigate the complicated process to manually engage life support. Secondly, the cameras and microphones used for video communications, which were in working order before the anomaly, had either been deactivated or were malfunctioning. Getting these back online as soon as possible would be a top priority for my communications team. After this, Markov took a seat and Yakovlev, my communications team member who worked at the terminal next to me, was called up front. His face was white as chalk, his forehead beaded with sweat, and his hands and legs were shaking as he stood before the control room. I have spoken at length with the one calling himself Alexei Ladovsky. He is coherent, rational and articulate, though he seems just as confused about his situation as we all do, and wants to come home. He claims to have no memory of how he got onto the space station, or of anything from the last 44 years. He says his last memories are crossing into space on a rocket in 1957, and then waking up aboard Mir today. Yakovlev paused to take a sip from a bottle of water resting on the podium. His hand was shaking so violently that he struggled to get the cap off. Something about the way he said this made me doubt his sincerity, so I went back and double-checked the recording and something strange stood out to me. Each time Ladovsky would answer a question there were several moments of silence and static. Upon further review I detected that he was keying and releasing his radio transmitter in rapid succession before speaking. He paused again, wiping his glasses on his shirt. I soon recognized this as Morse code, and well, here is what he transmitted. The screen above him changed to a white background with the following in stark black text. Translation. The smiling ones are with me. The smiling ones are here. Do not trust the smiling ones. Don't tell them you know. They will hurt me if they know. Those words have stalked my every nightmare since first I read them. They still fill my old bones with terror even just to type them out all these years later. Now my courage and endurance have failed me. It is late and I do not have the heart to keep typing at the moment. This is not a tale to tell alone in the darkness of my room, so that will have to be all for now. I promise to continue my story as soon as I regain my nerve and my arthritis settles down. If you do not hear from me again, take it as sign that someone out there did not want this information to get out and so thrust upon me that great and final silence. I hope for all our sake that it does not come to that. This needs to be told. I left the bathroom and made my way back to my station. Through the glass window on the opposite side of the room I could see a small group of directors arguing in Koptev's office. An uneasy quiet had settled over the mission control room, punctuated by mouse clicks and the clacking of keyboards. Each operator I passed avoided eye contact, either completely focused on the task they had been assigned, or doing an excellent job staring at the screen and faking it. Gossip and idle talk are strongly discouraged by the Russian Space Agency. When I arrived back at my terminal, I looked over to see Yakovlev hugging his elbows to his chest and staring vacantly into space. His chair had been pushed back from the desk and he reclined, stretching away from the radio transmitter resting there, as if it were a snake coiled to strike. What did I miss? I asked, snapping him from his trance. He looked over at me through cloudy eyes. No more Morse code so far, but Ledovsky has been pleading for rescue nonstop. It was really starting to get to me. I told him that we are currently discussing the best way to get him off Mir. Then I had to mute him. There's something seriously off about that guy. Yeah, no kidding, I said. The door to Koptev's office was closed, but the argument inside had grown heated and I could just make out a few words, all of them harsh. Through the glass I could see Markov gesturing angrily and occasionally pounding a fist on the desk. Koptev sat calmly at his desk, hands clasped in front of him. So is that what you think they are discussing in there? I asked. How to get Ledovsky back to Earth? From what I can gather, that is precisely what Assistant Director Ivanov wants. I heard him yelling something about Ledovsky being a national treasure and a hero of the Soviet Union. He thinks immediate rescue is the only option, and that we can figure out the who, what and why later on, once Ledovsky is safely back on solid ground. I rolled my eyes, though I honestly hadn't expected any other reaction from the Assistant Director. Ivanov had been a cosmonaut himself in the 80s, and even resided on Mir for a few months. He was a fiery and passionate man with very traditional values, the type to yearn in secret for a return to the greatness of the USSR. Now, close to retirement, he had been skipped for the job of director in favor of the younger and more level-headed Koptev. Ivanov bitterly resented this fact. He must have seen this as an opportunity to upstage Koptev, and as a possible propaganda victory. In Ivanov's mind, rescuing Ledovsky would open a door to the mysteries of the universe, and Russia would be the first to step through, a vanguard into the unknown. I take it Markov has other ideas? I asked. The head of tracking and communications was standing in the office now, screaming and pointing at Ivanov, shaking with fury. Quite an understatement. I've never thought of Markov as a superstitious man, but he seems to think there is something sinister and possibly supernatural going on up there. He's asked Koptev to cut off all communication with Mir, and proceed with deorbiting as planned. He wants to let the station burn with Ledovsky still on it? Cover this up like nothing happened? I asked. Yakovlev gave a solemn nod. And what about Koptev? Where does he stand? You know as well that the director is a cautious man. I think he is weighing out his options and will try to gather more information before making a decision. There is so much about this that cannot be rationally explained, but I think Koptev believes Ledovsky has gone mad. Our conversation was interrupted by Koptev poking his head out of his office. He spoke loudly, so the entire room could hear. I want all personnel, except the communications department, to put a hold on their current tasks. Spend the next half hour researching the smiling ones. Scour government records, historical archives, the internet, and anywhere else you can think of, for any reference to that phrase. Communications, I want your full attention on restoring our visual link to the space station. I want to see what's going on up there. I will expect reports in 30 minutes. He shut the door and the arguing inside resumed. Yakovlev and I made eye contact for a fleeting moment, and then turned to our terminals and got to work. A half hour later we were once again gathered in a semicircle with Koptev, Markov and Ivanov standing in the middle beneath the central screen. Each department reported their findings, but all were variations on the same theme. There were no substantial mentions of the smiling ones to be found. Even in the top-secret classified documents, searched extensively by intelligence agents, nothing could be found. No one had ever heard of, or knew anything about, the smiling ones. Koptev, clearly frustrated, turned to the communications department and it fell to me to act as spokesperson. I stood up from my desk and faced the director. I could feel the eyes of every person in the room crawling over me, and my left leg was shaking involuntarily. Sir, I have some good news, as well as some strange news. The good news is, we have fully restored the visual link to Space Station Mir and all cameras are now active. A subdued cheer went up in the room. I waited for it to recede and then leaned over and pressed a button on my terminal. The main display at the front of the room changed into a black screen separated by crisscrossed gray lines, each labeled with a different location on the space station, and each completely dark. The strange news is that every camera on Mir seems to be blocked or covered by something. My guess would be black electrical tape. Koptev and Markov exchanged a look, while Ivanov stared at the screen confused. After a few moments he turned to me, his neck glowing crimson under his collar. "You're certain that the cameras are active? There hasn't been a mistake?" Ivanov asked. "I'm certain of it, sir." "Okay, excellent work, Communications Department. We will take that under advisement. Anyone else have anything to report?" said Director Koptev. A man from the Life Support Department stood up and cleared his throat. "Director, I've been going over the data from the life support systems and I'm running into some inconsistencies. First, though the station's internal clock says 44 years have passed, it appears that the life support systems remained deactivated that entire time. In fact, they were only reactivated at the moment Mir reappeared in low Earth orbit. Secondly, though the electron oxygen generator is activated and working as intended, there is something very strange about the numbers coming from the Vozduk carbon dioxide scrubbers. They basically aren't doing anything. There's no carbon dioxide in the air, only oxygen. Either there is a malfunction in the Vozduk data collection system, or whatever is up there isn't breathing." Markov finished his sentence, glaring at Koptev, his eyes full of fire. "I don't like this, sir." "Stop being so superstitious, Markov," said Ivanov. "You are like an old provincial peasant woman making the sign of the evil eye." "Pah! There clearly must be a malfunction in the unit. It's the only rational explanation. Besides, a national hero is up there. He is alone and afraid, and not in his right mind. It is our duty to rescue him. It must be our first priority." Koptev's face was blank and hard as stone. He gave each man a dead-eyed look which silenced any further bickering. "Men and women of Roscosmos, it appears we have reached an impasse. None of us has any idea what happened to Mir or how Ladovsky got aboard. Hero or not, I will not risk bringing this man back to Earth without first understanding what has happened to him. So we have but one option left. We must speak to Ladovsky again, and we must ask him directly, who are the smiling ones? I know the message requested we not bring it up, but I see no other choice. I must know what we are dealing with, simply a deranged man who wants to come home, or something else." He paused for a moment and looked around the room, meeting the eyes of anyone brave enough to look up. Finally he turned towards our station. "Yakovlev, you've already developed a report with Ladovsky, so I will ask you to continue speaking with him. I want the rest of you searching for clues to a possible explanation. You are free to chase down any leads you come across. Now let's get to work. Cosmonaut Ladovsky, this is Roscosmos Mission Control. How do you read? Over." Anxiety and exhaustion had turned Yakovlev's face an ashy gray color. As he held his headphones to his ears, I could tell he was fighting to keep from shaking. Koptev, Markov, Ivanov, and the other directors were huddled behind his chair. "I read loud and clear, Roscosmos. Good to hear your voice again. Please tell me you have a rocket on the way to come get me. I'm ready to feel soil under my feet again." His voice was calm and steady, he seemed in high spirits. "We're still working on that, Ladovsky. It's quite a complicated process and will take some time to organize. In the meantime, there are a few questions I'd like to ask you." There was no response but dead static. Yakovlev looked to Koptev, who nodded for him to continue. "Cosmonaut, I need you to tell me where you have been for the last 44 years. Ladovsky gave an exasperated sigh. "Mission Control, I've already told you. I have no idea. Last thing I remember was escaping Earth's atmosphere on my rocket in 1957, and then waking up here today. There is nothing else." "Okay, Cosmonaut. Then how about you help us better understand your situation by checking on the visual communications system? There seems to be something blocking the camera. Can you find it on the console in front of you and remove the obstruction?" Several moments of silence followed before the radio crackled back to life. No. I'm sorry, Mission Control. There are so many buttons and lights here that I don't understand. I don't see any camera." Markov gave a derisive snort. We all knew that the camera was in the direct center of the terminal where Ladovsky sat, very clearly labeled and easy to find, even for someone from the 1950s. Yakovlev looked again to the director, who nodded for him to continue. Yakovlev took a deep breath and keyed the mic. "Cosmonaut Ladovsky, who are the smiling ones?" Instantly, the mission control room was filled with a shrill inhuman screech, impossibly loud and high-pitched. It felt like a hot drill burrowing into both of my temples. Underneath the shriek was a continuous stream of rapid mechanical clicks, like a damaged hard drive trying to boot up. I immediately felt nauseous. I watched as Yakovlev ripped the headphones from his head, and the directors covered their ears. After 10 agonizing seconds, the line went silent. I still heard, and felt, the noise reverberating in my head, and I rubbed my ears with the palms of my hands. "What the hell was that?" screamed Markov, hands cupped over his ears. The radio crackled and sputtered, and then Ledowski's voice returned, now high and panicky. "What?" "I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of that. I have no idea. Just please, get me out of here. I don't like it here. I just want to go home. Please," he pleaded, on the verge of tears. "Calm down, cosmonaut. I need you to identify the source of that noise," said Yakovlev. He was yelling like a deaf person. "Unknown," replied Ledowski. "Noise? I didn't hear anything on my end. There's nothing. Just please get me out of here." "Listen, Ledowski, there is nothing to be afraid of. We are trying to help you. We received the Morse code you sent. You need to help us understand what your message meant so that we can help you." When Yakov let go of the transmitter, Ledowski's voice came screaming over the speakers, now fraught with terror. No. I have no idea how they know. I didn't say anything. I didn't send any message, I swear it. I have no idea what they're talking about. Please, you have to believe me." Now he was groaning. "Oh no. No more. Please, no more." The line went dead for several minutes. The directors looked around the room in silence, avoiding eye contact. Finally, Yakovlev said what we were all thinking: is it just me, or did it sound like he was talking to someone else? Someone there with him? On the space station? Before anyone could answer, the radio clicked on and he was back. "Mission Control, Ledowski here. I wish I could help you, but I have no idea what you are talking about. Perhaps once I have my feet back on the ground and some food in me, I will remember more. Any word on a rescue mission?" Yakovlev picked up the transmitter to respond, but Koptev grabbed his wrist and stopped him. The static was interrupted by a series of long and short clicks. I grabbed for my pen and began to write down the Morse code message. DONOTLET. But that was as far as I got. The message was cut off by the screeching of that same shrill, piercing tone, louder this time. The mechanical clicking was there again, but was now accompanied by a deep wobbling bass note. The frequency of the wobble increased, faster and faster, like the spinning of a giant coin, the volume rising. The screech pierced through my brain like hot iron, and I could feel the bass in the pit of my stomach and all the way down into my testicles. It felt like I had been kicked there. My stomach turned over and I could taste the bile rising in my throat. I looked around the room and found I was far from the only one experiencing this. Everyone was covering their ears, some had grabbed wastebaskets to vomit in. Others leaned back in their chairs, eyes rolled back in their skulls. I was vaguely aware of one other noise. Somewhere, in the blackness of space, Ledowski was screaming. I awoke with a thin coppery taste in my mouth and a throbbing headache above each eye. The signal must have cut off at some point, though I have no memory of this happening. For the briefest moment of bliss I thought I was home in bed, safe and comfortable, my greatest worry the inevitable cry of the alarm clock. Then I rolled over and couldn't find my pillow, and when I tried to look for it I woke and found myself face down on my desk. I hadn't slept in so very long. I wanted so badly to close my eyes and drift away, to pretend this wasn't happening, but it was. And self-deception would get me nowhere. There was a job to be done, and by God, I was going to do it. What a fool I was. I should have stayed asleep. I shook the cobwebs from my mind and rose from my desk, trying to ignore the piercing ring in my ears. Looking around I could see other Roscosmos operators and engineers coming to in similar predicaments, some wiping vomit from their mouths with the back of their hands, others massaging their necks or temples. "Is everyone okay? Is there anyone injured?" came the loud voice of Director Koptev, clear but strained like an out-of-tune instrument. Scattered confirmations echoed throughout the room. I was about to attest to my own well-being when I happened to glance over at Yakovlev and stopped short. His forehead rested on the keyboard in front of him, and the headphones he'd been wearing to communicate with Ledowski were still covering his ears. I could not immediately tell if he was breathing, but he definitely wasn't moving. I rushed to his side and peeled off the headphones. A thin stream of blood trickled from each of his ears, forming small pools on the desk. Tenderly I lifted his head, cradling it in my hands and calling his name. His eyes were closed and blood dripped from his nostrils. After a few moments his eyelashes fluttered and his eyes opened, but they were distant and opaque as if he didn't see me all, as if he were in a dream staring off at some distant wonder. His face was blank, loose, and emotionless, except for his mouth which was curled up into a large, toothy, and humorless grin. He didn't speak nor seem to hear me at all. I screamed for a medic, but what I got were two intelligence agents in charcoal-colored suits. They lifted Yakovlev from the chair by his elbows and led him from the room. He wafted between them, grinning and dreamlike, in the direction of the medical facility. It was the last time I would ever see him. With Yakovlev out of the picture, the task of manning the radio fell to me. Markov tried to take the burden upon himself, but Koptev was having none of it. "I'm sorry, Markov," he said. "I admire your tenacity, but we each have our roles to play, and as a department head your role is supervising your department members and providing advisement to the director." When Markov continued grumbling, Koptev turned to me. "Will you serve your country and complete the assigned task with vigor and professionalism?" he asked. "Yes, I will," I replied automatically, the product of decades of training. Even as I spoke these words my brain was screaming, "No, I won't. Let me go home. Leave me in peace," but it was far too late for that. He turned back to Markov. "Would you deny him the chance to serve Russia and fulfill his duty?" "No, I suppose I cannot," rasped Markov, speaking to Koptev but locking eyes with me. He turned to follow Koptev. I swallowed hard and placed the headphones over my ears, but Markov turned back and snatched them off of my head. "No more headphones," he said to Koptev. "He can hear what the rest of us hear on the overhead speakers well enough, and I won't lose another man in my department to whatever is up there." Koptev nodded his approval and added, "Cut the audio feed as well. I don't want to hear that noise or anything else from that cursed space station until we're good and ready for it. Ladovsky will just have to stay iced for a while until we clear a few things up." I could have kissed him for that. I was not ready for this shit. Then the pair turned and walked off, continuing their rounds checking for injuries among the operators. After confirming there were no other major injuries, Koptev appeared at the podium up front once more. The room fell silent, and he began the greatest motivational speech I would ever bear witness to. It goes without saying that we are experiencing something completely unique in our species' history. It is my personal opinion that we are in communication with some kind of undiscovered life form. If this is true, it would forever change our understanding of the universe and alter the future path of humanity. Whatever these smiling ones are, we can all attest to the fact that this first contact, if that's really what's going on here, has been less benevolent than we might have hoped. Regardless, our job as scientists remains the same, not to have opinions and beliefs, but to provide proof. I have asked so much of you already, but now I must ask for more. We need to figure out what we are dealing with here. We need more information. We need proof. The fate of the human race may depend on it. The room was silent, the atmosphere gravid with the seriousness of the task at hand. I want the communications team to focus on analyzing that sound, but do not listen to the recordings directly. We've all seen what that can cause. The rest of you, keep searching for any clues that might tell us who the smiling ones are, where they came from, or what they might want. It's about time we finally catch a break. I put this in your capable hands, he smiled warmly. I'm counting on you, and I'm proud of every one of you. There's no other team in the world I'd rather be working with than the one I see before me here today. So analyze we did, breaking the noise down, searching for similarities in the sound wave pattern to known sounds from Earth, comparing the frequency and amplitude to mysterious recordings collected during various natural disasters, and from the deep ocean and outer space. We worked for hours, all for naught. Nothing even came close. The sound was completely alien, unlike anything anyone had ever heard or produced. It was more complex than anything we had even considered possible. The noise defied our very understanding of sound waves altogether. We had been affected by ultrasound and infrasound frequencies far beyond the range of what was previously thought possible. But we had all heard it and experienced the reaction. Denial was not an option. Others had better luck. By a confidential maneuvering by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Agency, we were able to obtain from the United States Space Surveillance Network higher quality satellite-based images of the exact moments Mir disappeared and reappeared. For once the Yankee spying actually benefited Russia, and the results were stunning. From these new angles, we discovered something previously overlooked. At the exact instant of vanishment, something had appeared in the path of the space station which momentarily blocked out the dim light from distant stars in the background. The image showed nothing directly behind Mir except absolute blackness. The same thing occurred at reappearance. The images were taken at a high frame per second rate, and in a few of those frames we could actually see the space station partially obscured by this void, as if it were disappearing into whatever was there in the darkness, like a photo of a diver disappearing into a pool. Various hypotheses were tossed around, but all kept coming back to the same explanation: a theoretical phenomenon known as a wormhole, or something akin to it. Until this time, wormholes, tunnel-like structures connecting two separate points of spacetime, though congruent with Einstein's general theory of relativity, had remained purely hypothetical. Now here we sat, an entire room of physicists and scientists, staring at possible evidence of an actual wormhole, excitement and terror bundled together into a peculiar knot of emotion. There are a few different theories on wormholes. Some believe they connect together two vastly distant points in space, perhaps billions of light years apart. Others propose a linkage of the same place in space at two different times. Still others, advocates of the multiverse theory, propound the idea of wormholes connecting a point in our universe to another point in a completely alternate universe. Any of these seemed a possible explanation for our anomaly. Though the potential evidence was exhilarating, the fact that it had appeared in the exact same location twice in the span of 24 hours implied that the wormhole had been controlled, or even manufactured, by some kind of intelligence, a sinister prospect given the events that had transpired since Mir's reappearance. There was one little problem with our wormhole theory, however. Unlike a black hole, in which the event horizon, a boundary in spacetime beyond which events cannot be observed, prevents light from escaping due to gravitational pull, a wormhole would not produce an event horizon. Peering through the mouth of a wormhole, more of a 3D sphere rather than a 2D hole, should reveal to us what is on the other side. For if matter can pass through, then so can light, though distorted by the curvature of space in the wormhole. All of our theoretical models visualize a wormhole as something similar to a bubble in space, with intense light radiating from inner rim of the mouth, quickly dimming as our view moves towards the center, and in the center we should be able to see right through to the planets, stars, or nebulae on the other side. In our case, we saw nothing, no ring of light and certainly no stars, nothing but an empty field of pitch black. Three possible conclusions can be drawn from this. Either our understanding of wormholes is way off, what we're seeing in the images and not actually a wormhole, but something else altogether, or it is a wormhole, but whatever universe it leads to is a vast empty void where not even light exists. This new revelation had produced an atmosphere of excitement in the mission control room, and in Director Koptev especially. Here we few stood, unique among all humans living and past, perched upon the precipice of the utterly unknown. We were living out a scene from the pages of a science fiction novel, except it was reality, a surreal, terrifying, astonishing reality. It may have been a bit of a stretch, but by this point Koptev had thoroughly convinced himself, and in turn all of us, that we had encountered a newly discovered life form, extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, or otherwise. We couldn't help but feel excitement. This was every astronomer's dream. Any who said otherwise was either lying about their own dream, or lying about being an astronomer. At the same time, it was a horrifying prospect, for what it meant for us, for our planet, and especially what it meant for Ledovsky. To Koptev we were on the threshold of a discovery which would alter the destiny of mankind, but among the other directors' opinions of how we should proceed still differed. They began to argue again, passionately and excitedly, not bothering this time to retreat to the confines of the office. "This is our chance," yelled Assistant Director Ivanov, brown eyes bulging, "to step out from under the shadow of the United States and take our rightful place as premier among the nations." His face was flushed and beads of sweat stood out on his wrinkled brow. "We'd be fools not to reach out and take it. I propose we send a Soyuz capsule to dock with Mir and bring whatever is up there back to Earth. I still hold out hope that it really is Ledovsky, but if it isn't, we capture it, examine it, experiment on it, and force it to reveal to us the secrets of the universe. Just imagine it, Russia, the first nation on Earth to make interstellar travel possible via wormhole generation. We would instantly become the greatest nation the world, no, the universe, has ever known. We must do this, for the benefit of all mankind and for the glory of Mother Russia." A few muffled agreements rose from the assembly. The room was filled with a quiet tension, almost palpable, like a steel wire ready to snap. All eyes turned to Markov, who sat with one leg crossed over the other, and an ironic smile plastered to his face. "Do you have anything to add, Markov?" asked Koptev. "Yes, Director. I still think it should be destroyed," he replied. "You orbit the space station with Ledovsky still on board?" "No. I don't think we can risk that. I think we should destroy it while still in orbit. I'm not sure how yet, maybe with a nuke, just to be certain." A few surprised exclamations rose above the general murmur that followed his remark. Koptev looked at him aghast. "Markov, you cannot be serious." "But I am," he replied. "People have already suffered right here in this room, while whatever is out there still orbits 200 miles above our heads. I think we've only seen a minuscule portion of the damage that might be possible. How many more people might be hurt, or worse, If we bring this thing back to Earth? We understand nothing about it, sir, nothing. Ivanov may be right, and by capturing it we may open a door to a whole new world of discovery, but once a door is opened, who knows what might walk through from the other side? The risk is too great. We may well be signing the death certificate of the entire planet, and welcoming our own destruction. I say we destroy it immediately and remove that possibility. Whispered approvals rose from a few of the gathered. Koptev and Markov locked eyes, Markov's smile gone now, replaced by a look of iron determination. I understand your sentiment, Markov, I do. But I will not be responsible for firing any weapon into space, especially a nuclear weapon. How would we explain it to the rest of the world? Who knows what other repercussions there might be? Markov let out a frustrated grunt and crossed his arms. Koptev continued. Besides, Ledovsky may still be alive up there. If there's still a chance to save him, however slim, we are obligated to try. Ivanov was beaming. So what? We go with Ivanov's plan and invite chaos onto our planet? Markov asked. No. We still need more data to make a decision. We need to know who the smiling ones are. Thank you for your input, gentlemen, but I believe I have a plan. The grin on Ivanov's face twisted into a sneer as he turned back to Koptev. And what might that be? We contact Ledovsky again, but this time we bluff. We tell him we have a Swaye capsule prepared to launch. We tell him rescue is on its way. Then we see how he reacts. I could feel the color draining from my face as Koptev turned to me. Think you can handle that? He asked. I forced myself to nod. I sat at Yakovlev's former console with the radio transmitter in hand, steeling myself against the task which lay before me. Someone had cleaned up the bloodstains, thank God, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to continue. I could feel the huddle of directors hovering over my shoulder, staring daggers into my back and waiting breathlessly for me to begin. The room had fallen quiet once more. On the main screen above me the white numbers and letters, indicating timing and positioning of the mirror camera feeds, glowed brilliant white against the inky darkness of the background. I took one final deep breath and, bracing myself for the worst, flipped the radio receiver to the on position. The hiss of static filled the room, a warm and comforting sound in comparison to that horrendous otherworldly screech. This is Roscosmos Mission Control, attempting to reach Cosmonaut Ledovsky. Do you copy? Over. Nothing. Static. I repeat, this is Roscosmos Mission Control for Cosmonaut Ledovsky. Do you read me, comrade? More static. More nothing. I turned to Koptev. Keep trying, he said. He has to be there. Unless the smiling ones stopped torturing him and finally decided to kill him, said Markov bitterly. Koptev opened his mouth to reply, when the radio crackled to life. Affirmative, I read you loud and clear, Mission Control. It has been quite a while, welcome back, your voice is different. What happened to Yakovlev? He is indisposed at the moment, I replied. I'm sorry to hear that, Mission Control, but I hope you might have some good news for me? Roger, affirmative. I just got off the line with the head of the crew over at the launch pad. They've got a Swaye rocket all lined up and ready to go. Should be headed your way within T-minus 60 minutes. Are you serious? Ledovsky replied. As a heart attack. We'll get the champagne on ice for you down here, comrade. You just get yourself squared away and ready to go. What do you say? Are you ready to come home? The hiss of silence returned. There was no reply. I bet they're talking to him, said Koptev. Telling him how to respond. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe they're throwing a little party to celebrate our stupidity, said Markov. Finally, after what felt like at least a century, but was probably more like 45 seconds, Ledovsky's voice returned. They want to know. The transmission cut out momentarily, and Koptev and Markov exchanged a glance. I want to know how long before the capsule arrives? All said and done, probably just under 2 days before the docking process is complete. Possibly sooner depending on where in orbit you are when we launch, I replied. Oh well. Okay. You're really coming? His voice was thin and confused. We're really coming. The line went dead once again for a minute, then two, the soft sound of static purring from the speakers. Then it roared back to life, and this time Ledovsky was shouting, though the transmission was quieter and muffled, as if he was turned away from the receiver. No. You can't do this. I won't let you do this. I don't care what you do to me. Not anymore. My life is already over. It's been over. I won't let you do this to anyone else. Followed by complete silence, no static this time. Ledovsky was still keying the mic. I could hear the quiet hum of Mir's oxygen generators in the background. It went on for about 15 seconds, then Ledovsky's voice returned, louder and agitated with an edge of dark humor. "Oh yeah? That's what you think. There's still one thing left I can do," and now the voice was even louder. Ledovsky was screaming directly into the microphone. You fools! Don't do it. Cancel the rocket ship. Don't send it. Leave me here. You cannot let them get to Earth." And then the sound began again, impossibly loud now, impossibly harsh. The white-hot drill in my head turned back on and it was screeching, piercing, burning, scrambling my brains to paste. I dropped the transmitter to cover my ears, but it seemed to have no effect. Suddenly a hand shot out and snatched the transmitter from my desk, and then Koptev was shouting into it, screaming over the alien shriek and deep resonance of the bass. "Who are they, Ledovsky? Who are the smiling ones?" And Ledovsky screamed back, through a wall of suffering. He screamed to be heard, but also to overcome the agony he was in. His words were quick and panicked. "No, not who, what. They are parasites. They are the opposite of life. The absence of life. They come from the other place. From that horrible other place. They want what we have. They've already taken it from so many. And now they want ours." His voice was fading and gurgling, growing thick as if someone was pouring motor oil down his throat. He struggled through somehow and continued. "They have taken over, taken mine away. Don't let them hurt anyone else. Don't let them come to Earth. Don't let them come to Earth." Markov grabbed me by the shoulder and shook violently. "Cut the feed," he screamed. "Cut the goddamn feed." "No," howled Koptev, pushing Markov away. "Not yet. We need more, just a little more." He keyed the mic again. "Do they look like Ledovsky? What do they look like, goddammit? I have to know. What the fuck do they look like?" But Ledovsky had no words left. He was crying, screaming, howling in pain. The piercing screech grew higher, bass lower, and the drill in my brain went into overdrive. It felt like my head was about to rip in two right down the middle of my face. And then Ledovsky answered without saying a thing. The blackness of the main screen at the front of the room was substituted for a maelstrom of color as the tape covering the camera was ripped away, revealing the most abhorrent scene my accursed eyes would ever fall upon. The first thing I noticed was Ledovsky's face, the only familiar feature in the bizarre scene before me. He was young, blonde, and probably handsome once, but now his face was distorted, like a newspaper ink image stretched across silly putty. Black tendrils swarmed around the edges of his face, sticking to the skin, tugging at his ears, wrapping around strands of hair, and pulling him backwards into the dark mass behind. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a dying fish, but the invading tendrils squirmed around his lips and snaked down his throat, and all that came out was a sickening gurgle. One orange-clad arm also protruded from the dark writhing mass, and his gloved hand gripped the radio transmitter. As I watched, a dozen black vines wormed their way around his wrist and hand, creeping like spilled liquid before tightening like sinew, peeling his fingers from the microphone one by one until it floated freely in the microgravity of the space station. The piercing sound cut off abruptly, the hot drill in my brain shut off, and the mission control room was bathed in a terrible silence as we watched Ledovsky's arm submerge into darkness. His shifting eyes were the last thing I saw, bulging brown irises filled with grim determination one moment, unspeakable horror the next, and then suddenly dead and glassy as he finally let go and surrendered to the void. Ledovsky disappeared, absorbed into the squirming darkness behind him. With nothing human left to hold my focus, I had no choice but to turn my attention to the rest of that macabre scene. The space Ledovsky had occupied just a moment ago was now filled with a grotesque and faceless monstrosity. It looked like a floating ball of liquid mercury, 3 feet wide and 3 feet tall, but blacker than the darkest night. Its surface seemed to constantly squirm and shift, and it shimmered with rainbow iridescence, like an oil slick on a rain puddle. At least 8 thick tentacle-like appendages extended from its central mass, each wrapped around computer terminals, door handles, ceiling hooks, and other equipment to keep itself in place in the station's microgravity. All over its surface smaller tendrils appeared and disappeared, wiggling and curling in on themselves. Behind the creature that had once been Ledovsky loomed 3 exact duplicates, each devoid of any discernible face. The background was a tangled mess of floating tentacles, weaving through one another and twisted around each other like spaghetti noodles, some attached to equipment in the room, others gripping the first creature, as if laying hands upon the shoulders of a troubled friend. Suddenly all 4 creatures moved as one, squirming squid-like around one another, and spreading into a line across the capsule. With a jerk, their attention seemed to snap to the camera in the terminal, though without faces it was hard to tell for sure. The scene froze like that for a horrifying moment, and I peeled my eyes from the screen. The Roscosmos mission control room was still and silent, each person petrified in place like a statue, slack-jawed, with eyes locked on the main screen. I turned my attention back to the video feed, and now the core of each creature was bubbling, boiling, churning like the waters of a maelstrom. The center of each opened into a tiny white hole which quickly grew in size, expanding to cover most of the creatures' bodies. Then, stretching and twisting, each of the holes transformed into a shape I recognized all too well. A smile. No eyes, no ears, no nose, no face, just enormous empty inhuman smiles. Then the noise was back, but this time I wasn't hearing it, I was feeling it. It was inside of me, inside my head, and it was coming from them, from their smiles. It was coming from the smiling ones. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My body felt completely paralyzed. Their smiles were growing. The sound was rising, screeching in my head like the billion swarming wings of a demonic locust plague. The drill in my head switched back on, but now the torque was turned up to the highest setting and was joined by the thrum of a jackhammer breaking concrete. It felt like the 2 hemispheres of my brain were being torn apart. I could smell burning electrical wires and taste copper in my mouth. In my peripheral vision, I saw a flurry of movement. The men and women around me, the pride of the Roscosmos State Corporation for Space Activities, were hurting themselves. Some slammed their faces into their desks over and over again until blood poured from broken noses and shattered mouths. Some picked up pens and pencils and violently stabbed themselves deep in the ear canal, then pounded them further in with palms of their hands. Others gouged their eyes or sawed at their wrists with any sharp object they could find. Then everything faded away until my entire world was a white-hot ball of pain and I lost consciousness. My eyes snapped back open, and I stared at the screen. The smiling ones were gone, and in their place were 4 small gray humanoid aliens with buggy black eyes. In my head I heard 4 distinct voices speaking together. Let us in. My vision went dark and I was gone. Then I was back. Now 4 giant bipedal lizards appeared on screen, oozing dark green slime like sweat. Black venom dripped from their jaws. Their reptilian eyes stared into my soul and their voices shrieked in my mind. Let us in. The tenebrous veil of unconsciousness folded around me once again. Then I was back. Now 4 angelic beings floated on the screen, translucent, but gleaming like the sun around the edges and draped in flowing gowns of a million impossible hues. Their beautiful voices sang a harmony in my head. Let us in. The scrim of shadow fell upon me once more and I was gone. Then I was back. Now the inside of the space station was an alien forest filled with a swirling fog of green and gold. Through the mist emerged 4 giant mushrooms. Their rubbery skin was a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of psychedelic color explosions. Each swayed and shivered in a primeval dance, following the beat of their own secret music. 4 spongy voices sprouted in my brain. Let us in. The black curtain fell once more, leaving me in darkness. Eternal darkness. Infinite darkness. Perfect darkness. Timeless. Egoless. Uncaring. This was the void. This was their home. The universe if nothing had ever existed. I'd always been here. I'd always be here. Then I was back, but not to Roscosmos Mission Control. I was on Space Station Mir. The noise was gone. The molten javelin of pain in my head had disappeared. 4 human figures stood before me. 3 men and 1 woman, dressed head to toe in the bright orange spacesuits of the early Soviet space program. Through their clear bubble helmets I could see their countenances. Young, attractive, proud, full of vigor, smiling warmly. I recognized each face, recalling the pictures of the so-called lost cosmonauts that our recent research had turned up. They were Andrei Mikov, Sergei Shibor and Maria Gromova, and the last, of course, was Alexei Ladovsky. The smiles on their faces remained. Their lips did not move, yet I could hear their voices in my head, kind and composed. Let us in. Please, let us in. And if it had been in my power, I think I would have. Then I watched as their smiles grew larger and larger, contorting their faces into massive inhuman grimaces. The skin of their lips and cheeks began to rip and tear away, revealing toothy skeletal grins. Their hair fell out, their skin dripped away, worms crawled from their empty eye sockets. The glass of their helmets shattered, their spacesuits deteriorated and fell away, and the smiles just kept growing. I tried to scream but my body was still paralyzed. I heard the bones in their jaws snap simultaneously and the smiles engulfed their entire face, flipping them inside out. I closed my eyes, and in my mind I again heard their voices, now desperate and horrid, chanting. Let us in. Let us in. Let us in. Rising into a horrible crescendo. When I opened my eyes I was back in Roscosmos Mission Control. The writhing, tentacled abominations still filled the main screen. My mind was filled with a horrible cacophony as the four voices morphed into 4 million, screaming in 100 alien languages but somehow all saying the same thing. Let us in. Let us in. The people around me seemed to be in some kind of hysterical religious ecstasy, some laughing, some weeping, some howling like wolves and tearing their flesh to shreds with their teeth, others seizuring violently in their chairs. Let us in. Let us in. Then I heard another voice, this one not in my head, but coming from a little ways behind me. It was the strong, clear voice of Director Koptev crying out. Cut the feed. Cut the feed. For the love of Mother Russia and everything you hold sacred, cut the goddamned feed. And I tried. My hand reached out for the button on the terminal which would cut all contact with Mir. It inched closer. 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 Then it wrapped around a pen laying on the desk, pressed the button extending the tip, and turned it towards me. I watched in horror as my hand brought the pen slowly towards my face, aiming directly for my eyeball. I was powerless to stop it. My hand felt like it was under someone else's complete control. And it moved closer. 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 Until it was almost touching my cornea, filling my entire field of vision. Then something hit me hard in the side of the head, stars danced and exploded before my eyes, and I was falling to the floor in slow motion. Somewhere far above me Markov was pounding the button on the terminal which cut the video feed. Then he had an office chair in his hand, smashing the computer terminal to pieces. The main screen went blank. The piercing screech and waddling bass disappeared, replaced by the weeping and wailing of the injured and dying, begging for help. Markov stood hunched, breathing heavily, still holding the office chair. Koptev was standing next to him, white as a ghost. Ivanov lay dead at his feet in a pool of blood, his throat torn out by his own fingernails. Markov grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. I blinked my eyes and surveyed the room. I was met by a scene of bloody carnage that looked more like a battlefield than a mission control room. Forgive me for hitting you, Markov whispered. Then he straightened and turned to Koptev. Now will you believe me, Director? Now will you heed my advice? He shouted. Koptev nodded sadly, his eyes watering. I'm sorry, Markov, I should have listened. We shall proceed with your first idea. We deorbit Mir as originally planned, and the world knows nothing. We burn them. We burn them all, and pray it is enough. And God help us if it isn't, said Markov. On March 23, 2001 the world watched in wonder as the space station Mir re-entered Earth's atmosphere near Nadi, Fiji and disintegrated over the South Pacific Ocean. An official statement from Roscosmos announced that Mir ceased to exist at 5:59 and 24 seconds GMT. At the time, Mir was the largest spacecraft ever deorbited, and there were concerns that sizable pieces of debris, particularly from the docking assemblies, gyrodynes and external structure, could survive re-entry. Officials in New Zealand issued warnings to ships and aircraft in the South Pacific, and the Japanese government warned its residents to stay indoors during the 40-minute period when debris was most likely to fall. Nothing came of it. Mir is thought to have burned up completely during atmospheric re-entry. Though rumors and speculation abound, no significant debris of the wreckage of Mir were ever recovered. At least, not officially,